currently working on projects exploring the political significance of subcultural practice and the criminalization of street leisure, in particular, Black music in London. He has a strong interest in ethnographic research methods, and he also keenly follows and contributes to debates in cultural criminology. And he is a member of the editorial board for the British Journal of Criminology. And he also has a book titled Understanding Street Culture, Poverty, Crime, Youth, and Cool, which came out in 2015. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Jonathan Ilan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, folks, and thank you, Lydia, for the very, very kind introduction. So what I am going to speak about this evening is some research that I've been involved in doing for at least 2 years, probably more. And a kind of a large proportion of it now is being published as an article in the British Journal of Criminology called Digital Street Culture Decoded, Why Criminalising Drill Music is Street Illiterate and Counterproductive. And the reference is up there. And so you can probably tell what my talk is going to be about this evening. I don't know how familiar everyone is with drill music or with cultural criminology, but I'll be covering matters relating to them both. And yeah, I hope everybody can kind of then appreciate the phenomenon I'm talking about. And of course, you're very welcome to ask questions or make comments one way or another. So I kind of start this talk with the picture of an album cover here. This is Heady One, who's a kind of a very popular and successful drill rapper from the UK. He released an album called Edna, which was named after his late mother, and he released this in October 2020. Seems like a long time away. A long time ago it wasn't. And this reached #1 in the British charts. Okay, so the first thing to say then is that drill music is popular. It's essentially quite mainstream in some ways, essentially a kind of pop music. The other thing to say about drill is that it is, rightly or wrongly, this is something that we'll be discussing as part of this talk, it's sort of implicated in or considered to be related to some of the serious violence that's been taking place in our major urban centres like London. And you can see here an article that was from the BBC News website. This is an article from March 2020, okay, so a long time before the album came out, but just then after the album came out, this story kind of went back to the top of the kind of most read pile. And this is an interesting piece of journalism. In some ways, it's really good in that it spends a lot of time talking to people in Tottenham, where Heady One is from. On the other hand, I'm a bit concerned that it doesn't really challenge this narrative that drill music, in fact, causes violence. In fact, this says that a Heady One track from a couple of years back, a track we'll be looking at in terms of its lyrics a little bit later, it says that this track is part and parcel of some of the exchanges that have taken place between people in Tottenham and an area that they have traditionally had rivalries with, and that some of the song is in fact a provocation which has links to murders that have taken place around this territorial rivalry. Okay, so this idea that drill music is in fact not just music, but some kind of online gangbanging that can result in people dying in the real world. And lest we think that this is something that isn't sort of being talked about too much anymore, here is a Mail Online, and it was a Mail on Sunday headline from the weekend. You can read it yourself. This is what it says about drill rap, that, you know, Spotify is making money off the fact that murderers, rapists, torturers, etc., are releasing music. Okay, so let me move it on. Sorry. So yeah, so there's a phenomenon going on here, okay, where drill music is being criminalized in a number of different ways. Okay, the first thing to say is there's huge amounts of drill out there. There are absolutely thousands of videos up on YouTube that are produced by young marginalized people, very often black or of color, and these things do reference drug sales, violence, lavish lifestyles, all sorts of things that I'm going to be talking about in a little bit more detail in a moment. Okay, and police forces and local authorities have said that some of these videos amount to glorifying gang culture and violence, or that some of these videos, as we saw at the Heady One video, are they constitute specific threats or provocations that lead to violence, right? And another thing that we see is that the police, the prosecution, sometimes local authorities, depending on the relevant kind of authority in question, have taken these music videos to be confessions, right? To be evidence of involvement in criminal activity. And what this has resulted in is quite famously a number of video takedowns. I think the police have requested close to 600 video takedowns from YouTube, performance bans. This thing that we haven't really seen in Britain in a long time, what's kind of known as a prior restraint order, where if you can see in the bottom right of the screen, there's a particular rapper there, Digga D, and you might have seen the documentary about him on BBC, which is excellent, defending Digga D, where Digga D was forced to consult with the police before releasing any music. Okay, so prior to releasing or saying anything, he's supposed to check the lyrical content of his material with the police. And we're seeing increasing amounts of videos and lyrics being used as evidence in criminal trials, right? Whether this is evidence of criminal intent or association. Yeah, so very often in joint enterprise kind of prosecutions, sometimes the evidence that people are involved in a gang, a kind of a joint criminal enterprise, is video evidence of people together in a video dancing or rapping, etc., etc. So, yeah, this phenomenon of UK drill and the way in which it's been criminalized, I think raises a number of important criminological issues that are well worth thinking through. So how are we to understand the expressivity of young people with links, whether these links are real, whether they're just claimed links or assigned links to violent conflict? Okay, how are we to understand these videos? Are they confession, reportage, glorification, threat, provocation, rhetoric, hyperbole, fiction, art, or some kind of complex performance? Spoiler alert, I'm kind of going to argue for the kind of latter view. How seriously should we take UK drill as a cause of violence? That's very important. That later we'll reflect on this idea of kind of a logical chain. Should we see UK drill as a cause of violence, or perhaps a kind of a symptom of the same socioeconomic issues that are perhaps driving increased levels of violence? And how are we to understand the ways in which drill music is being treated by local authorities and police forces in England? And yeah, I'm deliberately not saying Great Britain because, yeah, things are different in Scotland. But in any event, and just to say as well, I'm not checking the chats. I might just pause now and see, does anyone have any questions or comments at this stage, or I'll take a cue from the people running the seminar as to whether we should wait till the end.
We do have one question.
Sure.
So it says, wouldn't censorship block creative processes and freedom of expression, from Lena?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yes, you're completely right. What we say generally about freedom of expression is it's not an absolute right. So, for example, we're not free to shout, you know, this is going to sound weird, cinema. When was the last time people were in cinema? But anyways, the classic example is you're not allowed to shout fire in the cinema and cause, you know, total mayhem if there isn't a fire. The point being that free speech is supposed to, has limits, okay? And the argument that would be made is that is that speech that promotes violence or procures violence or precipitates violence isn't protected speech. Okay, so that relies though on a kind of either an assumption or a claim that you can prove that this is something that does in fact cause or precipitate violence. And that is an argument that the police and prosecutors are frequently making. And I suppose, spoiler alert, I'm going to argue that it doesn't. Okay, so you're absolutely right. This is inherently a block on freedom of speech. The question, I guess, comes down to, is that justified? And some people will say yes, and others, like myself, would argue no. That's a really good question. Skip, I'll carry on, and again, very happy to take questions kind of as we go through at the end. So kind of where I come from in terms of my place in criminology is basically I'm a cultural criminologist, so I'm very interested in how meanings around crime and crime control are generated, how we actually fundamentally understand indeed the very concepts of crime and crime control. And one of the very interesting things that cultural criminology has said, I think, is that we cannot separate real life crime from mediated representations of crime in the current era. What does that mean? Well, traditionally, we've always seen these things as very different, right? There's crime that happens in the real world, and there's the way in which it's covered, say, by the media, and we have to understand these things are separate. Cultural criminologists would say no. Nowadays, they're very much interlinked, okay? And this is exactly what we're seeing here, right? Where people post videos and lyrics online, okay, and they're immediately becoming implicated somehow in questions about criminal intent, questions about evidence, or indeed whether these things constitute crimes in themselves. So that is one of the concepts that's going to be very relevant to how we consider this. Another is this notion of street culture that I do a lot of work around, and this is kind of, you know, it might be called road culture or on-road culture with a British accent, but this is essentially the ways of being of marginalized urban populations, which may have, you know, links sometimes to certain forms of street crime. And what's really interesting about street culture is that it has migrated online to a certain extent. Yes, so you can have questions around, well, does social media, as you can see down below, does social media provoke violence in the real world? Which is very interesting. And there's sort of two schools of thought on this. You have Forrest Stewart's work, who basically say that, look, you know, gang members, people heavily involved in street culture, know just as well as anybody else, yet not to feed the trolls, that the internet is full of hyperbolic exaggeration, fake threats, fake news, as a man once said, and various other things, so that people don't necessarily just react to what's online through flying into violence in the real world. Okay, sometimes that can happen, and nobody's denying that. Okay, but just that it mightn't be as common as is suggested by certain people, say, on the more law enforcement side of things. Erwin Rogers and Pinckney, doing research on social media and crime in the UK, have said that, well, social media can be a bit more of a trigger to violence in the real world than, say, an insult in real life for a number of reasons. A, it creates a record. Yeah, so very often, you know, you can see violence not occurring because everyone can save face. You know, it's alleged that somebody called X a Y, but then there's plausible deniability there. But that doesn't exist with social media because the record's right there. Also, it creates more of an audience. Okay, sometimes violence in street culture is performative. It's about projecting a certain image of the person committing the violence. and it therefore is done for the benefit to a certain extent of an audience, which is something that social media can generate. And I think possibly both of these perspectives have something to say, but I do have particular sympathy for Stuart's position that yes, whilst it does happen, we have to be a bit cautious, saying that every online boast, threat, put down is going to have some kind of real world consequences. Probably a great deal won't. The other concept in the background is this idea of rap on trial. So work that's been going on in the US for a good number of years, looking at how rap music and rap lyrics and rap videos have been used as evidence in criminal trials. And as I said, we've seen that happen in the UK a whole lot more. And it's becoming a bit of a mainstay. I read there in the newspaper again over the weekend that the Crown Prosecution Service is issuing guidance, right, around how you can use things like YouTube videos and rap lyrics in prosecution cases. Okay, and kind of with all of that in the background, I did my work, which I'm gonna talk about, which is basically what I call kind of immersive analysis of countless number of drill videos. What does that mean? Well, my background in, as a researcher would have been as a street ethnographer, believe it or not, quite a long time ago, I might add. And so I was used to trying to understand the street culture through kind of burying myself in it, getting to know people, getting to know the scene, and just spending time around it. As all ethnographers do, using our innate capacity for social learning to try and generate social science findings. And essentially, I adapted this to watching YouTube videos. I just spent a lot of time watching a lot of videos. I paid great attention to seeing gossip, listened to a lot of radio shows, watched a lot of YouTube that discusses the happenings in the drill scene, talked about it to everybody I could, etc., etc. So really immersed myself in the whole scene over a good number of years. And I kind of concluded that these attempts to criminalize drill were two things. The first thing I said is that criminalizing drill is street illiterate. Okay, what does that mean? Well, Dwight Conkergood, who is this amazing ethnographer of gangs in the US, he came up with this concept of street literacy many years ago. And this is the theory that, you might all agree it's kind of common sense, but it's a theory that people immersed in street cultural environments can read various different street cultural signs effectively. And he was talking about, American street gangs and graffiti, right? He was saying that a middle-class person might walk through an area and kind of be horrified at graffiti they see and think it's very unsettling. But that graffiti might well say, this is a safe space. And the point is that people who are street literate can read these things. And I basically just flipped that on its head and said, well, to be honest, a certain amount of police, prosecution, judges are kind of inherently street illiterate, right? And won't necessarily understand what these rap lyrics are saying. So as we look at what the rap lyrics do say, and I'll admit, some of them are very, very strong, it can be shocking. Being 100% honest, when I first encountered drill, and I'm a long time rap, grime, dancehall, etc. music fan, I was like, oh, these lyrics are a little bit salty. These are a bit more violent than I'm used to. So yeah, it can be shocking. But the point is, you need to interpret them in the correct context. And one of the arguments I make is that what tends to happen in criminal trials and when drill is being criminalized is that the music is being taken literally, and the context in which it needs to be understood isn't being considered. Right? And because drill is being criminalized, I make the argument that this is counterproductive. It's counterproductive because, as I'm sure everyone here knows, there is a long legacy of negative interactions and hostility between police forces and marginalized communities of color in the UK. That's not news to anybody. And essentially, by what kind of becomes assaulting the culture of younger elements of marginalized communities of color in the UK, you're sort of exacerbating these tensions. Equally, we can hear in drill that a lot of people talk about using music as a way out of crime. Okay, and the concern I'd have here is that that kind of back door, as it were, might be getting closed off somewhat by the criminalisation of drill. So what is drill? I won't say a huge amount here. You know, it's a form of rap music. Traditionally, it would have had quite a stripped down sound. Talk about musicologically a little bit more in a second. So obviously, it has this violent and criminal lyricism, ostensible associations with active participation in street crime. So look, we've had gangster rap for many, many, many years, but in drill music, there tends to be this kind of much more immediate talk of a relationship to crime. Whether this is true or not, different story. Okay, drill music has its origins in Chicago. It's very much been taken up now in the UK. There's kind of this very distinct UK variant of drill music. It's got a number of kind of musical identifiers, kind of these sliding bass lines, heavy HOA kick drums, these kind of ad-lib interjections. Yeah, and UK rap now, interestingly, has become really influential in US rap. So the late Pop Smoke, kind of very successful US rapper, kind of posthumously successful. He was tragically shot and killed. Rappers like Drake jumping on UK drill instrumentals. Yeah, it's become this very successful genre. So both internationally and commercially within the UK. And also drill is part of a wide and vibrant UK rap ecosystem where you have all these different kind of subgenres and sounds, kind of Afro wave, Afro trap, real rap, whatever you want to call it, all these different kinds of UK based rap sounds at the moment. And to be honest, some drillers will have quite a wide repertoire. They don't only appear on drill beats necessarily. It can be quite difficult to tell what is drill and what's another kind of rap. What's usually a bit more clear are the kind of very clear and consistent visual and lyrical themes in drill music and videos, masks, kind of particular kinds of gestures, deep descriptions of various kinds of street crime, including violence against ops or rivals, and a kind of a luxurious penthouse foreign car, designer clothing, lavish lifestyle that tends to be described in very, very detailed ways. But also it's really important that we understand that that's one side, and admittedly the majority side of kind of themes within drill music, but it's not the only one, right? And for a long time, kind of work in hip hop studies have recognized what they call the dissonance in rap music. And this is basically the idea that rap will often discuss opposing ideas simultaneously, right? So kind of deep spirituality and kind of raucous sexuality in the same verse. Yeah, so we should be looking for contradictions and much more ambiguity than a kind of a quick scan of the lyrics might indicate. You can find this greater depth. And indeed, within drill, we find a lot of reflection on hard living conditions, the squalor of, say, dealing drugs in the bando, or the abandoned flats and houses, the trap houses where drugs are being sold from, and the reflection of death and from friends, the pain of having friends taken away and incarcerated. So drill is wider perhaps than a kind of a quick analysis of it might indicate. Also, really importantly, it has to be pointed out that there are lyrical conventions in drill which kind of come actually apparently from kind of African American kind of poetic conventions But gangster rap and drill tend to be narrated in the first person stance. Okay, so it's a person describing themselves, the things that they have done, the things they're going to do, right? But that's a convention. It doesn't necessarily mean that literally they have done these things, they are going to do these things, etc., etc. So I might pause here for questions.
Yeah, we have a few questions. I was just going to say. So the first one we got was, I understand the "this is my life and all I know" reasoning, as some have used as justification. But when you antagonize, taunt, and disrespect the life of someone alive or deceased with lyrics who most times is a rival, how does this express art and not promote vengeance or hate in a continuous cycle?
Yeah.
In a lot of cultures, disrespect cannot be ignored, and they are seen as weak if they do not respond.
Yeah.
Often with stabbings, words are just as important as actions, I believe.
Yeah. Look, 100%, right? And one thing I wouldn't deny is precisely that point that's being made. And in particular, within street culture, notions of violations or insults that are left to fester are very important, very powerful. And yes, these things do result in real world violence. Okay. The question is, to what extent is drill sort of creating something that wouldn't have existed without it? What do I mean by that? Look, I'm not denying that some of these things that are said will be taken as very disrespectful, but I think I said to someone before that I kind of wish that drill was causing the violence, because if it was, we could just get rid of it and the violence would go away, and that would be great. Okay, and I think the point is that it isn't. And whilst I completely take the point that drill can be the place where some of these kind of violations or disses or whatever are put across, and these have resulted in real world violence. If only it were that simple. My concern would be that if not, a big concern would be, to be honest, a point that I make is that, look, ultimately drill is music, and if people want to insult each other online, they're probably even better off using social media, which is designed to communicate very directly with people online. And we're not talking necessarily about banning Twitter or Instagram and whatnot. So yeah, the short answer is I have no doubt that these things have happened. Kind of on the next slide, I think I make the point that how much violent talk do we have versus actual violence? I think that the actual proportion of violence that's directly generated by drill probably isn't as high as might be suspected. And on the other hand, drill offers a lot of things. For example, for those involved in making the music, it's also an outlet for emotions, etc., etc. Often we're telling young men, particularly from a street cultural lifestyle, to manage their emotions better. This is one way of doing it, and in some ways, actually, it might provide something of a steam valve, and maybe even reduce some violence in that way. So I'm not trying to cop out and say what you're saying is wrong. It's not. It's entirely right. I just think there's all these other things happening around it. And I do maintain that, even if it is the case, we shouldn't, music and lyrics in general aren't great things to use as evidence in criminal trials, because, lyrics are lyrics. They're not necessarily records of truth. And I think that you can look at takedowns and you can look at censoring particular tracks of particular artists, but that needs to be done on the basis of really firm evidence. Yeah, that's that has respect for kind of local idiosyncrasies and has deep local knowledge. Okay, so if it is a case where it can be agreed that what's happening in a particular track is, and there's one or two notorious tracks that do this, and then there's one particular track that nobody can believe hasn't been taken down. So I agree, but I think we have to go very carefully censoring it. And I suppose my point is that we tend not to be there tends to be a very roughshod approach to this. Sorry, really long answer. I hope I did justice to the great question, though.
Yeah, we have another question.
Yeah.
They said this is similar to the controversy of gangster rap in the US in the early 90s that was linked to gang violence between the Bloods and the Crips.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, the music was just stories of their lives. Why censor their stories because it is violent instead of helping make changes within the urban communities?
Yeah, it's a really interesting reflection. I quite often go back. There's this book, In Search of Respect, by a guy called Philippe Bourgois. It's about crack dealers in East Harlem. And there's a number of issues with the book, but anyways, there's a lot of it that's very good too. And in one part, quite early in the book, he reflects on what he's going to say about his participants. He says, I'm going to be painting my participants in a really negative light, not because I don't like them, because I've come to really like them, but they've done some really brutal things, and I'm going to talk about that. He says, the reason I'm going to talk about it, knowing that this will reflect badly on them and on poor communities of color in a place as unequal as the US, the reason he's going to say these things is because he cannot and he would not be complicit in the experience of censoring poverty. He wanted America to know that this is how people get brutalized. Conditions get to the point where people do these things and these things become normal and natural. And we shouldn't look away from that, no matter how disturbing it is. So, yeah, I very much take that point that putting across life experience, however unpleasant it is, can be really, really important. And I think, one of the issues that we do have as a society in Britain with our criminal justice system is that our instinct is often to suppress uncomfortable things that come up from areas and communities of deep marginalization. And perhaps the thing to do is actually not to suppress, but to listen and really, I'd argue, really interpret what's being said and what it really means. And for us doing criminology, sociology, I mean, we can do that, in an academic way, and that's a useful thing to do.
We'll take one more and then we'll let you carry on and then we can come
Cool.
back to them. So the next one was, how did you process that information? What kind of methods did you use to analyze and process what you saw?
Yeah, very fair. Right, I'll put my cards on the table here. I'm not a huge believer in qualitative analysis software. Possibly my generation. So yeah, I used the classic ethnographic kind of technique for making sense of the social world, which is I use myself, and the analysis really was that kind of a manual thematic analysis that people do when they aren't following a particular system, that's worked out, where any time I came across something that I thought was interesting, I made a note of it. Anytime I found, the other thing I did was I didn't just analyze videos and lyrics, but I analyzed the discussions below the line as well. And actually, sometimes they could be even the most revealing. And I copied and pasted conversations that I thought were like really, really relevant. And I just built a bank of stuff. So the kinds of things that signal to me that these were lyrics or songs or videos or conversations that I should keep further note of to reanalyze later. Or if they were extremely popular, I generally went by view count, or if seen media had been talking about them a lot, I tend to make a note of that. If something struck me, if there was a particular lyric that caught me or something in the video that caught me, I took a note of that. Or as themes started to emerge, if these themes were being addressed particularly well or directly, then I made a note of them there. So in a sense, it was quite organic. And people might say, well, that's very subjective. And I would say, yes, all research is. But yeah, we all as social actors make sense of the social world. So kind of an ethnographer tries to do that and tries to do that as systematically as possible. But yeah, obviously there's a good bit of my interpretation in that. Good question. I was glad to actually get it to peer review. That was the bit I thought would kind of stick my research the most. Maybe, yeah, here's a little visual of what a drill video might look like, just to give some people a flavor. This was actually, I screen grabbed this around Halloween, so one of the masks is a bit more ghoulish than usual, but ghoulish masks are quite normal in drill videos. Okay, I'm going to move on now to my analysis. I'm going to tell you some of the interpretations I made of kind of that drill ecosystem. And the first thing was a kind of a point I made in response to a question, which is that violent rhetoric far exceeds actual violence in the world of drill. What does that mean? Well, people talk about violence and in violent terms in the music and around the music constantly. Okay, and yet, you know, the actual amount of real life violence involving drillers would be significantly less than the actual talk of violence. Okay, so it's about then understanding, why do people talk about violence constantly, you know, in their lyrics, in their performances, everywhere, if, you know, it's only being done a certain amount of times. And I concluded really that violent talk accomplishes useful work for a driller, because a drill rapper, drillers possibly something different, but violent talk is what I say, or I call it, it's currency in an economy of authenticity. What do I mean by economy of authenticity? Well, rappers are constantly fighting about who's the most real. You know, you lot only talk about this stuff, us lot, we do it. Yeah, and that kind of conversation, that idea about being a real, authentic, fearsome street subject is part of what orders the hierarchy of success in the drill world. So cultivating a violent reputation is important. It's important generally within street culture, and that's not always about precipitating violence. That can be about creating a deterrence effect. Sometimes some of the people have to be less violent than the people who are thought of as violent, because their reputation deters any real life violence from taking place. So yeah, there's definite advantages to cultivating a reputation for violence. Now, you might rightly make the argument that, well, the police interest might be a distinct disadvantage there. You could be right. But in any event, within that world of drill, violent talk is essential, a resource that can be commodified through the monetizing of music. Okay, it can make people more successful. Yeah, we might agree that's a sad state of affairs. When you look at how music fans, consumers, drill fans talk about the violence of rappers, you can really see them buying into this idea about different gradations of street authenticity, and the real kind of impetus is to support the rapper who seems to be most genuinely street and violent. Okay, so yeah, drill fans are constantly discussing rumors of this gang and that gang, and this, you know, chefing, that this stabbing and that stabbing, and da 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 da. You know, and it's real fodder for scene media, but I don't always think it should be considered the glorification of violence. I think the fan talk is the glorification of violence, but not necessarily that the music and the lyrics necessarily glorify violence totally. I think there is this, as I said, more ambivalent attitude to crime and violence that you can actually detect. Yeah, and actually, a lot of the time, the people who really do the glorification are the fans. And, you know, there's constant speculation as to who these fans really are. You see people talk about it online. You know, so-and-so is a rich white boy from Surrey. What's he doing talking about this? And yes, yeah, so you know, it would be a tragedy if violence that's affecting marginalized communities is being discussed by the more affluent, who kind of glorify it, and yet the convictions or the, you know, video takedowns for glorifying violence go back to the disadvantaged community. So yeah, I think when you look at it in that way, we see that only a proportion of the violent talk in drill has a real connection to the real world, right? And even where this occurs, there is possibly a bit more ambivalence than is often appreciated. The next kind of topic, or the next theme of my analysis, related to what I call spatial practice and street performance. What's this all about? Well, central in street culture is this idea of representing your area, repping ends, as someone might say in London slang, and it's a key theme in drill as well, that people revere their hyper locality. Okay, so it's not just postcode wars; it's which is a problematic idea in a few different ways, but it's people fighting over far smaller territories, and I've heard that one of the things that can be used as a marker of territory is the first couple of numbers in the hyperlocal landline, as if anybody under the age of whatever has a landline anymore. But in any event, but I think that this idea of territorial violence, I'm not denying for a second it happens and can happen in alarming amounts and ways, but there's a particular imaginary, a particular perception of it, which comes to dominate kind of popular and law enforcement imaginaries of serious youth violence. And and I've no doubt that sometimes drill is implicated in some of the tit-for-tat violence that can exist around these territorial conflicts. But also, and probably more than that, drill is probably tied to quite complex process of personal branding by rappers who are very often commercial actors. And part of the economy of authenticity is about cementing a violent reputation for your area as well. Yeah, so the area that you're from as a rapper says something about you, and this has long been the case. So part of what we might see as precipitating territorial violence is sometimes not that, but it's much more about building a kind of particular mystique and reputation for an area that actually isn't tied to real world violence. The other thing to say, of course, and is very rarely spoken about, my colleague Joey White, writing about grime music, talked about the extent that grime facilitated the crossing of boundaries and conviviality, good relationships between people from different postcodes. Now, I know from seeing media that people from different postcodes have beefed on video shoots and airplanes and whatnot, yes, but also there have been a lot of significant kind of boundary crossings, people from Brixton and Peckham on the same record, etc., etc. So, I think that's another thing that needs to be considered that often isn't. The process is far more ambiguous, again, than it's often given credit for. And one of the later points to make, of course, is, I'll start with the conclusion. Do not believe everything that you hear on the internet. We live in, we've just passed an era of Donald Trump and fake news and disinformation and, scares about vaccines. And really what sensible people are saying is just be very careful about what you read on the internet. Then some of these same sensible people are turning around and saying, yeah, well, this rapper online said that he shot somebody, so he should be charged for a shooting. And these things don't stack up. And it's really important to understand that street cultural communication has inbuilt defenses against outsiders. Why? Because snitching, including, I've learned through this research, self-snitching, baiting oneself out, talking to, telling the wrong people about your own misdeed, highly, highly, highly taboo in street culture. It is not acceptable behavior. I'm not saying it doesn't happen a lot, but rhetorically, certainly it is considered, a no-no. And drill music in particular is very full of ambiguous, obfuscating language. And, if you heard Digga D on that documentary defending Digga D, and he was asked, how much of the lyrics are true? And he's like, there's a bit of truth, there's a lot of, a bit of exaggeration, and a mix of all kinds of stuff. So, like many forms of artistic expression, we can expect to find a very complicated, mixed bag of truth and fiction, and certain things can sometimes be true on a deeper level, right? They can be saying something about the pain and violence of growing up on ends from an area of, entrenched disadvantage, but not necessarily talking about a very literal event. And the final thing to say is, wrapping into that whole question of the economy of authenticity is that, it's generally accepted that real drillers should be very careful about what they say online and should not self-snitch in any way, shape, or form, and should, really not be talking on the internet about criminal behavior. So the song at the heart of the BBC article from the start of the talk is this song by Heady One, No Better. And, this song famously has a lot of sh sounds in it when, words might have been spoken that would be incriminating. And in fact, and this was RV's lyrics here, it could be Heady's. He says, man do shit for the gram and tweet. So I love this kind of street cultural term when man is both me and you. So you do shit for Instagram and Twitter, man rise that and ski, and somebody else does something else. And this is all about ambiguity here, and not incriminating yourself online. So again, the idea that we should see drill as some kind of true record of fact, really goes against common sense in terms of believing what you hear on the internet, or and also the entire kind of logic of street cultural communication, which I'm sure a lot of people will know that maxim: if you know, you know. That's deliberately meant to speak to insiders and not to outsiders. So, can we see drill as a cause of violence? And the point that I make, and I briefly foreshadowed this, is that yes, I'm not denying that some drillers have been convicted of very serious criminal offences. Other drill rappers have been victims. But I do not think, kind of logically, we can view drill in general as a cause of violence. Maybe in some few incidents, specifically, it might have been. I think we can consider there would have been far deeper causes, and perhaps then other incidents which might have sparked the violence. But you cannot really see drill as behind violence in the chain of causation. Rather, violence and drill kind of occupy the same position. Drill is co-symptomatic with violent street cultures. And these are both caused by powerful marginalizing forces. I have here on the screen: structural inequalities, social, political, and economic exclusion. Right? Or as Charis Kubrin put it in her work in 2005 about gangster rap, somebody asked about earlier, that drill narrates the street world, it doesn't dictate the street world. Okay, so we shouldn't necessarily understand it as a cause of, but rather a kind of a description of, and not always a literal description of. So what then to make of how the police and various different authorities have done with this? Well, unfortunately, I did detect quite a whiff of institutional racism in all of this. Okay, let me explain why I say this. So I'll kind of do a little bit of PowerPoint karaoke and kind of read this out. So I want to make this point kind of clearly and crisply. The assumption that drill glorifies, incites, procures, or evidence violence ultimately risks demonstrating these kind of racist tropes. The idea that the expressivity of young, disadvantaged Black people isn't legitimate art, but instead a form of gang activity. Okay, so that's kind of the idea that these young people of color from the ends, they can't be artists. Yeah, so they must be doing some kind of gang activity. That young, disadvantaged Black people are not capable of cultural complexity and abstract sophistication, and therefore only speak to their own direct experience. This is quite an old racist trope, and it's the idea that people of color, their art isn't as sophisticated as classical high white art, which is abstract. Our Black art can only be folk art, and therefore only speak to direct experience, and that is both untrue and racist. Okay. Black people, just like anybody else, are perfectly capable of creating pure fiction. Yeah. But this idea has existed in art interpretation circles, this old racist idea. And thirdly, that young disadvantaged Black people are incapable of participating in internet exchanges without resorting to real violence. And this borrows from Forrest Stewart's ideas a little bit. Yeah, and this is the idea that, that when people are disrespected or violated online, they can't shrug it off. I'm not saying that 100% of the time it's shrugged off. Yeah, but the notion that when people do this kind of activity online, it must be considered a prelude to violence. That's a problematic assumption to make. Okay, and what we also see is kind of anecdotal evidence that really the kind of criminalization of drill is being used to close what we call in criminology the enforcement deficit. What's the enforcement deficit? Well, this occurs where there's a strong feeling by police or prosecutors or whatever enforcement authorities involved. There's a strong feeling that somebody is guilty, but there is a lot of effort required, or it's very difficult to procure the evidence necessary to secure that conviction. Right? So when people feel sure but can't find the evidence, that's called an enforcement deficit. And there is anecdotal evidence there that, that people will, prosecutors, police might, be bringing in some of this material to try and close that deficit. Yeah, and kind of as I say, for where we do have decades in this country, as you do between marginalized populations and police forces around the world, decades of what's called over-policing and under-protection, where police forces are experienced as kind of hostile pseudo-occupying forces, and not in a kind of a protect and serve framework, where you criminalize the expressivity of young people in that context is potentially very, very counterproductive. So yeah, just a few very quick conclusions. Very happy to hear more from all of you then. So yeah, this is a very good example, I think, of the kind of interplay between real world crime and mediated representations that cultural criminally talks about. I say that the criminalization of drill should not become a shortcut for the policing of harmful crimes. Okay, it makes little operational sense to criminalize the genre. It has negative consequences. Okay, so I'm not saying that harmful crime shouldn't be policed. I'm not saying that for a moment. I'm saying it should be done in a better way. And actually listening to drill, I'd say, facilitates an understanding of how structural inequalities fuel criminal behavior. And the rap industry, for some, provides a way out. Also, we do hear a lot about lack of diversity within the creative and cultural industries. And here we have a very organic emergence of, excellence in creativity, by ethnic minority artists, and potentially being suppressed here. So, that's an issue too. That there ends my lecture. I'm very happy to hear more of your thoughts, questions, and comments.
Thank you for that. That was really interesting. We have quite a few comments, and some people have put some other comments in the chat. So I'll read out some of the questions we have. So someone's asked, are specific people more vulnerable to being influenced by drill music? Are youths especially craving the sense of belonging drill music promises?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, that. Look, somebody I think said on the chat earlier before I zoned it out, because I've learned from online teaching that if you're talking, try and avoid the chat. Yeah, look, people have said this about video games in the past. Yeah, look, unfortunately, we're living in times where there is horrendous violence in our urban centres. It's going up instead of down, and people are vulnerable to getting involved in that. I come back to how I wish it was drill that was the problem, because it would just be very easy to just scrub that off the airwaves. It would be done. The problem is, we ban it tomorrow, not much is going to change. And yeah, so that would be my point. I've no doubt that it will be heard in a certain way by certain people, but the fact is that there are, bigger, wider social, cultural, economic conditions that are allowing this kind of violence to fester. And so I think drill is kind of the least of our worries there. So I kind of don't even engage on the level of, well, is it worse for some people or others? For those who are in a situation where violence is becoming a likely trajectory for them, if it's not drill, something else. Insulting on the street, whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got another one that says, from my understanding of rap music, in America it's been increasingly glamorized and associated to luxury lifestyle, more so in recent years, but in the UK it descends to being associated with crime and violence. Why is this?
Really good question. Yeah, there's a big debate in street culture kind of circles about what is it with kind of those from backgrounds of poverty and marginalization that makes them reach, not for, a 2-bedroom semi-detached, but for the mansion. Why is it that those who have the least kind of are drawn to images of massive excess wealth? And there's a couple of different schools of thought about that. Some people say it's an over-identification because people are excluded from mainstream socioeconomic life. They want an extreme variant of it. Other people say actually extreme wealth is democratic in that it's something anyone can aspire to. I don't know if I agree that extreme wealth is democratic. So yeah, why is it? I think that what I'm starting to think more and more is that the real issue here is that a kind of a more middle class life is becoming further and further and further out of the reach for the marginalized. In other words, a billionaire lifestyle is becoming nearly just as unlikely as that 2-bedroom semi-detached that you own. So I think that if you're going to fantasize, you might as well fantasize about the completely over the top thing, than the thing that might have been a reasonable expectation a generation ago. Does that make sense? So yeah, I think this is about how that chasm is opened up between those who have the least and those who have the most. And I think when things were a bit more in the middle, you could think about going from 8. I think that now people just dream of the other spectrum.
So someone else has asked, are any of the hosts or panelists of the inherent culture of this webinar? I'm not sure if you can answer that question, maybe, if any of us are of the inherent culture. I'm not really sure what it means.
I think it's a question about whiteness. Yeah, fair point. I am white. I've been interested in issues of racism a while. As one of my fellow kind of scholars working in areas of race would say, it's like, look, you don't have to have had cancer to become an oncologist. And, if you see, you don't have to be of color to see problems with racism and to try and do work to try and address it. And that's my answer to that one. I don't know if I have it wrong and if I'm just being defensive. I know white defensiveness is an issue, and if it is, sincere apologies for that. But it's important that work gets done, and I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah. So someone said, doesn't the use of we and us in description of societal blame detract from identifying the source of oppression?
We might get you to repeat the question, Maddie, if you don't mind. Just the line went a little squiggly.
No problem. So it says, doesn't the use of we and us in the description of societal blame detract from identifying the source of oppression?
Very good. Yeah, could well. I hadn't actually broken it down like that, but you could well have a point there. Yeah, could well. I think part of the issue, yeah. Look, I do think though that at some level, at some level there is a collective, you know, no matter how badly treated some people are relative to others. Yeah, there is a collective there. And, you know, possibly the way I was using that is that, you know, I think there is a collective responsibility about ensuring a decent life for everyone in that collective. And so part of that plural language, you know, is about that, and is about social failure. But yeah, you're right. You're right. You could totally break it down more and say, well, actually, some are fine, others aren't. And yes, totally. But you know, in terms of should we just all splinter off and everyone look after their own group? Well, it's difficult, you know.
Yep. So we have another question. Did you find that many drill music creators tried to distance from crime and just treat their music as a journal, or do a lot of them try to straddle the fence and be the rapper but also in the life?
Yeah, I think that's a really well observed point, and I think that's kind of part of how that economy of authenticity works. And you know, you know, you definitely do see people certainly strongly stating um, that they do straddle the worlds. Trying to remember the first part of the question. You know, is that about distancing themselves from crime, or is there a contradiction there? Yes, contradiction is there. Contradiction is rife in all cultures. Yeah, and you know, we can identify it here in rap that, you know, but you'll see in the written paper, I give an example from Abracadabra, who is like basically in a song saying, I'm sick of all the violence, you know, and then on social media, a day or two later, he's cussing out somebody and saying he's going to do this and do that. So, you know, again, it's that notion of dissonance that, you know, rappers very visibly do these things where they hold these contradictory ideas together. And actually, that's what we do as a society. I mean, you know, look, just turn on the news and see a politician saying we're doing all that we can about COVID, and we know they've messed up. So, you know, people holding these contradictory ideas, you know, saying something that is quite patently untrue or complicated or problematic or self-contradictory is something we all do. Some people get called out for it more than others, but it's a feature of culture.
Yep. So, do they wear masks or hide their identity in order to hide from repercussions or being spotted in connection with a descriptive evidence known only by police?
Yeah, you know, there's all when I first started doing the research, so kind of people have, I think, wised up and not. There used to be all this lore around things you could do in videos to avoid prosecution, right? So there's this idea that if you put that disclaimer up saying this is all fiction, then you know that video is never can't be used against you in court. That's not the case. It would be much easier if it was the case, but it isn't. Prosecutions can still try, and I believe have been successful on occasion on getting it in as evidence. And yeah, certainly the kind of lore, what people were saying at the start was, yeah, people don't want to be identified. Yeah, that they're, you know, they don't want to be linked to confessions that they're making in videos. And to be honest, you know, I thought, well, that's not a bad idea because, you know, the police are using this stuff in evidence. But, you know, what I've seen then, you know, more times is that, you know, people wearing a mask isn't always that effective. You know, I sat there with somebody going, oh, that's so and so, that's so and so. It wasn't a police officer, but people were able to identify people in their own community quite easily. Doesn't matter if they're wearing a mask or not, body language, shape, whatever. You know, and so it's not always that effective. The most convincing explanation for masking I heard was from M. Huncho. He's a trap rapper more than a drill rapper, but you know, he's I just want to go to the corner shop and not be bothered, you know, and that's probably one of the better, more convincing explanations I've heard. It doesn't seem that fun, you know, being a celebrity when you don't want to be. But yeah, a lot of the talk about how masking and treating your video in a certain way can save you from your music being used against you as evidence, unfortunately, isn't the case.
So up next, we have, would you agree that drill/grime music inspires individuals who identify to and see these artists as role models, as they have often come from nothing and become successful, and this may inspire others to do the same?
Yeah, I mean, role models. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. You might say that kind of a more insidious role model would be, just a straight up organized criminal. Again, there's this ambiguity there, and people succeeding in life through their creative talents. I don't think it's a bad thing. Um, and yeah, there's worse role models out there in terms, and this goes back to this point about not necessarily taking everything that's said very literally, and that again, you take somebody like Abra, who's kind of said, I'm really fed up with the trap. Listen to some of his lyrics, he says it, and yeah, you'll still make a song that's violent, but they are saying things like that too, and I think, it's like listening to anything that somebody says. I think we can understand when people are performing a bit or saying something they feel they should say, or you can sometimes tell when somebody's kind of letting out a deeper truth. And yeah, so in terms of role modeling, I don't think that rappers are the worst role models out there by a long shot. They're far worse, unfortunately.
Then we have, the accessibility of researching criminality online surely causes similar effect on crime rates along with general social media. Will there be a way to censor everything from everyone, especially with the dark web, etc.? I'd like to know the panelists' opinion on the raising crime/violence rates and the biggest source this comes from.
Okay. A few different things there. Yeah, you can. That's the biggest and best argument against censorship is, you can never get it all. So, it's an issue. And and the sunlight argument as well, which is, sunlight's the best disinfectant, that the more you censor things and stop people talking about them and shutting them down, ultimately the worse that they get. And it's criminological theory around deviancy amplification, that would say you do actually sometimes make things worse by trying to stamp down on them. So there's that. And then, questions about the rise in violence. Look, if I could explain that, a professorship's possibly on the way. It's hard. It's hard. There's a number of things that have happened, say in the last 10 years, let's say, probably we can see like violent crime peaked probably about 12, 15 years ago, was going down. Then a few years ago, it started going up again. It's up, it's continuing to rise. What's that all about? It's really hard to know about these things. These things are susceptible to things like demographics. Is there, more young men in the population at a particular point, as opposed to more older women? It's susceptible to things like that. There's other things like, there's a few things I think that are important, right? We have seen a lot of crime numbers go down, and you'll often hear people on the political right saying, well, we don't need to spend so much on, crime control, and particularly the more kind of welfareist things because crime's going down. When you actually look very closely at crime, it's very concentrated in areas of disadvantage. And I'm not just talking about disadvantaged people being perpetrated as victims, right? I know it's a classic line that the police trot out and say, well, we're really trying to deal with this because it's the most marginalized and it's people of color who are the victims here. There's a lot of truth in all of that, but right, sorry, I'm trying to get to my point here. My point here is that it's very hard to say why crime rates are going up. What we can say is it seems crime is disproportionately negatively affecting disadvantaged communities. It's quite possible that declines in welfareism, increases in inequality, and quite specific things like heavy cuts in youth provision, Yeah, like everything, youth clubs and sports and the works, like slash and burn on those budgets. It's quite possible that, these things have been contributing to some more localized spikes. But I think it's also really important to recognize that the rises in crime aren't falling proportionately. These are kind of, attacking people who have the least, yeah, and who are the most marginalized. Now, that's important to remember too. It's a bit of a politician's answer, but yeah.
Thank you. So the next question is from Lena. So what are drill rappers' motivations for putting these messages in their music? Is it to expose injustice, promote inclusion, or or as a style of self-expression?
I can't really speak to what goes on inside the head of a drill rapper, I suppose. Like with all art, we've all got to take it in and make our own decision what the artist is trying to do there. Like, look, I'll just say, like, there's all this talk about, the lack of politics in drill and in street culture and da. Like, you can look at a song called Black Lives Matter by OFB, and yeah, I think that, like, there is politics in there. There's possibly more consideration of injustice, etc., than drill is given credit for. What motivates individual rappers? It's hard to know. They generally say money, success, cool stuff. That's what they say. But I think it's probably a little bit more complicated than that.
Thank you. The next question is: would you say that that institutional racism in the criminal justice system and white supremacy are the same thing?
Oh yeah. Oh look, there's there can be no doubt about this. As I kind of say, in theoretical criminology classes, it's like, look, we've been looking at all this really complicated stuff. Now kind of look at this, which is kind of like a chart of different ethnic groups and rates of stop and search, length of sentence, all these things. It's staggeringly simple. Kind of the darker the shade of skin, that more harshly and disproportionately the criminal justice system treats you. It's shockingly simple and blatant. And yes. And I suppose what's deeply unedifying and frustrating is, like, it's not as if we've not known about this for a long time, and it's happening. And I think that there's just way too much tinkering around the edges. And yeah, look, yeah, yes, institutional racism is endemic in our criminal justice system, much like in our society at large. Ditto white supremacy.
Thank you. The next question is: there are a lot of artists who sing even romantically about killing or harming others. For instance, Tom Jones, Delilah, or Marty Robbins. They're hanging me tonight. Even in a lot of rock and roll music encouraging underage relations, drug use, and violence. Yet nothing is questioned about it. I agree with you about the prejudice and subjection of drill music due to racism.
Yeah.
Not really a question, but
good comment. That's institutional racism in action there, yeah. Because yeah, there you go. And I use the example of Johnny Cash. He sang "I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die." It's a cold lyric. You might find that very cold lyric. And yeah, nobody suspects he actually meant that. And yeah, so why is it when a young person of color from the end says something violent, oh, it's got to be the literal truth? Yeah, so spot on example of institutional racism right there.
So the next question we have was, how do you feel the police are using their interpretations of drill to combat crimes such as county lines?
Yeah, good point. Well, it goes back to what I said about that enforcement deficit. Yeah, like I do feel that there's a sense that, it's like, I'll put my hand up, like, as a lazy researcher, look, all that stuff's on the internet. You can access it there. Great. Similar in terms of police work. So it's just on the download that video. Great. Here we have the person that we're trying to, get for X and Y, talking about doing X and Y. Brilliant. So, I could talk as well about well-known rappers who've been convicted of county lines offences. So I've no doubt it's happening. And I think, again, the kind of point I tend to make about this is, look, if you've got good evidence, you've got good evidence, and that's how the criminal justice system is supposed to work. If people are doing very harmful things and you can prove that, fine, but like, leave the music videos out of it. I just don't think it's a reliable genre to use as kind of things like evidence and stuff like that. So I haven't encountered it personally, but I'd be very surprised if in county lines cases, videos, etc., aren't being brought in to say, well, somebody, I didn't go into something, but drill is just so democratic. So in other words, somebody can just be a person making a video and they're actually really good, and all of a sudden they become somebody in the scene. Yeah. And so things can happen really quickly. And yeah, sorry, I'm not answering this question very well. I think, the point is, yes, I'm sure it is being used. The question is it being used appropriately? And I tend to think there isn't really a very appropriate use of music lyrics in criminal trials. Music lyrics should only be in court if somebody's arguing on copyright about who wrote what.
Yeah, and then we've also got someone asking if systematic racial inequality is evident in this webinar.
Sure. Not much I can do about that. But I'd like, specifically take questions or critiques from people of color, for sure, if that helps.
Yeah,
we have a lot of questions coming in. If we just pick a few and then we can round up, shall we go with a few random ones?
10 minutes.
Yeah, of course. So someone asked, fascinated you about this topic to research and investigate within it?
What motivated me to? Yeah, I guess it kind of built on my interests. I wrote about grime about 10 years ago, so I've kind of been looking at stuff, and basically grime gigs were being shut down, and kind of promoters had to register their passports with the police, all kinds of things you think of people on bail having to do. So I've been writing about the criminalisation of British urban music for about 10 years. And this was just the latest chapter in it. And I did quickly see somebody correctly noted, this has been going on since reggae and funk and, blues parties. People of color in Britain used to, black communities had to have dances in their houses and in private venues because they weren't given commercial venues. They weren't allowed in commercial venues. So yeah, this stuff has been going on for decades and generations.
And just to lead on to that answer, someone else asked, do you have any drill rappers that you like or that you listen to? And if so, who and why?
I listen to it all. At the moment, who's really kind of... Well, I got on this Real Potter Paper thing for ages. I know he's not quite a driller. I had that stuff on repeat. At the moment, the project I'm listening to most is Fredo's. I know it's probably not strictly drill artists, but it's quite new. It's also a really, really good album, I think, is around a body of work. Kind of strictly speaking, drill music. Probably the two that I'm rating most at the moment would be Frosty and Millions. But yeah, not for any particular criminological or sociological reasons. Just I like them as rappers.
And then we've got, Do you think that a white drill rapper would be taken as seriously as a black one within the courts? It says taken as seriously or harshly as a black one in court.
That's a really interesting question. It's hard to know. It's hard to know. Do you know that? It's really hard to know because look to get into this thing. You know, there's all sorts of weird ways that racial dynamics will play out in criminal justice, and whether somebody will be, whether somebody will be treated more harshly as a kind of a traitor to their culture. I don't know. It's a difficult one to answer. But you know, I think the thing about understanding racism, and this is like a point I think a lot of people would make, is that you know you have to move away from the individual situation or the isolated moment or case and look systematically at what goes on. So you know, however one white rapper would be treated, we've got to understand that there is a kind of a cloud or a question being put over a black cultural form, you know, which is being brought in as part of a mechanism by which, you know, people of color are being disproportionately criminalized. So that's the issue there. And whatever would happen to one person who might be an interesting or a different case, I don't know if that's the issue. But it's an interesting thought experiment, and I don't know is the honest answer.
So we had a few more questions we'll go through. So someone said, isn't the most violence seen in society through delivery of policies that reduce the opportunities the black masses have, maybe? Do you agree?
Yeah, so when sociologists talk about structural violence, that's what they're talking about. Yeah, yes. You know, if we want to look at the most, you know, virulent form of violence in the UK, you know, and that's kind of not just a pun with coronavirus. Yeah, we've got to talk about structural racism, structural violence there. Yeah, which happens on a racist basis. Yeah, good point.
Okay, so and another one is the representation of drill and rap in general as associated to criminal activity a result of the underestimation of the art of it, and could a study, appreciation or cultivation of drill or rap in general in institutional settings provide the conceptual resources needed to nuance, change, break this representation without harming its integrity?
I think it's a really interesting question. Look, I'd just say, look at jazz, right? Jazz in the 1920s was the devil, you know, the devil's music. It was associated with the scourge, the illegal drug that was the scourge of US society at the time, which was alcohol, which was banned at the time. And you know, it was seen as deeply, deeply problematic and troubling music, and led to all sorts of terrible things happening. And now, you know, posh white folks like myself might, you know, drink a coffee and listen to it of a Sunday. And yeah, you know, so time, one way or another, time tends to change these things. Yeah, I think institutional acceptance is important, which kind of tend to come with time as well. But yeah, and I think the kind of one of the issues will tend to happen is even like, you know, even within a kind of a culture, you know, like for a while, I don't think drill was taken seriously musically by some rappers. Like, you know, it's an upstart thing. It will never amount to anything. And now, you know, yeah, it's really getting accepted. I think it's a really good point. And I think you will see it happen. And look, just like jazz, reggae, even grime now has produced kind of, you know, wise heads who sit and be the talking heads on the TV shows and all of that kind of thing. You know, yeah, drill will too, ultimately. It's a really good question.
So just one last thing, because I know you've got to go soon. So someone's put, I'm a person of colour and you have answered all my questions. We need people like you, as in academics, to inform people who may be prejudiced or ignorant to the actual truth. You must face criticism, even seen as kind of like an outsider, but the fact that you're researching, writing journal articles and doing this conversation shows your passion. Thank you, Dr. Ilan. It really made me see things in a different sense.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I do appreciate that. Yeah, like, you know, I think I don't want to say anything too controversial or anything like that. I like kind of notice some of the chat going on, but I'll just say issues about racism aren't just solved by representation. I know that's something, and I know that's a part of it, right? But look, it's going to take a big push across all sorts of areas of society, culture, law, politics. So yeah, look, if I've offended anyone, I do apologize. It's not the intention, but it's going to take a lot of people doing a lot of work, and anyone who can row in, from my perspective as a kind of a middle class white guy, all that work's needed. It's not a question of people not doing it, but I understand the point of representation. I get it. I just don't have a thing for that right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I appreciate the kind words. Thank you, and thank you all for your amazing engagement. It means a lot. We're all trapped in our homes, etc., etc. Don't get a lot of engagement with our research at the moment, so it means a lot, folks. I really do appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Johnny. This was, I think, a great event, and I'm really glad that you were able to come today and hold this talk. We still have many questions in the Q&A, which is great because people are really engaging. But should I tell them to maybe email us on the society email, and then we can forward the questions to you?
Yeah, totally, no problem at all. And it's been really good speaking to you. And yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity and for the engagement. It means a lot.
Alexa posted in the chat our socials, including our email address, so you can message us or email us the questions that you had and were not able to be answered because of the time, and then we can forward them to Johnny and he can reply to them. So thank you, Johnny, again. Thank you, Julia and Karen, for helping us organize this, and thank you to the Criminology Society committee, right? Alexa, Maddie, Amy, Kieran, thank you so much.
And Lydia.
Yeah, and Lydia.
Thank you.
I can't thank myself. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Thanks, Johnny. Lovely to
Thank
see you.
you.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye.